All right, well,
There.
thanks for coming, everybody, and thanks, Matt, for setting this up. And so I'll first of all ask Len to introduce himself as the chair of the organization.
Thank you, Scott, and yeah, chair representing the MBTA Right of Office Committee, and Scott's going to be leading the meeting today. Thanks.
Matt.
This is Matt Archer, MPO staff.
And Marty is our guest, Marty Milkovich.
Hi, Marty Milkovich. I lead the model development group at Ctps.
John.
John McQueen, Walk Boston. Good afternoon.
And Kate.
Hi, everyone. Kate White, Public Outreach Coordinator of the MPO.
Andy.
Good afternoon. My name is Andy Reeker. I work at the Cambridge Community Development Department. I am a transit planner.
And I've made this mistake before, but we have two Johns. So John Seward.
John Seward, Move Mass.
Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Scott. I'm a transportation planner in MPO Staff Certification Activities Group.
And Franny.
Hi, it's Franny Osmond, and I'm going to be off screen or coming late because, as you can see, I'm outside. And thank you. That's Franny Osmond from Town of Acton.
Let's see who's next. Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann McGann. I am the project manager for the Long Range Transportation Plan for the Boston MPO.
Todd.
Todd Crane, Transportation Administrator for the Town of Brookline.
Tegan.
Hi, I'm Tegan Syke, Executive Director of the Boston MPO staff.
Anna Christina. I think.
Anna Christina from Boston Society of Civil Engineers.
Okay. Skylar.
Skylar Larrabee, Boston Society of Architects.
Owen. Owen McDonald. All right, we can skip over and we'll go to Fred.
Yeah, Fred Mosley. I'm representing the American Council of Engineering Companies.
Okay, and David Montgomery.
Hi, David, Town of Needham. Sorry to be late.
No problem. Sarah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Lee. I'm the Assistant Director of Transportation at MAPC.
Okay. Is there anyone I missed?
Chris Porter from the Massachusetts Bicycle Coalition.
Oh, my apologies. People are joining here. It got a little confusing. Okay, I think that's everybody. So the next thing we wanted to discuss was the CTPS modeling roadmap. So we have Marty Milkovich here, who's the Associate Director of Regional Modeling and Analysis for the MPO. And he's going to talk with us a little about the process of modeling at CTPS. So with that, you can kind of take it away whenever you're ready.
Perfect. Let me just bring up my screen here. Everyone seeing a title slide, modeling roadmap?
Looking good.
Excellent. Okay, so before I dive into the presentation, I just wanted to take a moment and talk a bit about our regional travel demand model, that's the group that I oversee. We're charged with maintaining the existing model as well as developing updates to the model and preparing for the next LRTP This is the model that's used for a lot of our client-directed work and application. And so what I want to acknowledge first before getting into our conversation is how you might have, seen or heard about this model up till now. And I would characterize the use of this model primarily as a predictive tool, meaning that this model takes as inputs some kind of best guess point inputs of future scenario representations of land use and networks. And then it generates estimates of important metrics on our transit networks, roadway networks, given that specific set. And so that's critical work necessary for a lot of federal state filings, as well as project evaluation. And that work is continuing. So here we're now going to talk about modeling in a little bit of a different way, because based on the fact that we're all, zooming in on this meeting, we can't deny that there's great uncertainty in the future of how people travel, what our transportation networks might look like, what our demographics and other land use characteristics may look like. And in that situation, the usefulness of that single point prediction to think about and develop our plans for, especially in our longer term planning horizons, a single point prediction it has limited usefulness. I mean, really what we want is to see something more across a range to get a sense of, what are the trade-offs, what are the tipping points, what are the best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. And that can be a lot more informative rather than saying, even if we can say this is a likely future, let's plan for that. We really want to know, is there a potential future where this plan, might not work out so well? So that's really motivating this rethink of what we're conducting on how we incorporate our models into the planning process. So this is going to affect from the ground up how we're designing the models, how we're implementing them, how we want to be running them. And then on the scenario side, the application side, how do we specify scenarios? Can we move away from a best guess inputs into something that's more about ranges? And then how do we analyze the ranges of outputs? But then also how we talk about and think about the model. So there's a real risk when the model just gives us, here's one number, the risk of kind of taking that number and thinking, oh, this is what the future will be, rather than, well, this is a representation of all of the assumptions that went into the model and the inputs and comes out to this point. But if you just have that one number, it's easy to kind of forget about the whole modeling process and just say, here's the future, here's what 2040 looks like. So for today's discussion, I hope you can bear with me. I want to really break it down and start with, when I say fundamentals, I mean fundamentals. And I want to get us all on the same page on, what models are in their essence. And then let's start building it back up so that when we get to talking about the futures of modeling at CTPS, I want to make sure we're all part of the conversation, no matter where we are as a stakeholder in our modeling work. So for this presentation, I have about 24, 25 slides, and it's equal parts, fundamentals, then the futures, which is kind of our plan, what we're going to do with the model. And then I've added a last part, a special request from Len they're actually slides that I presented last spring to the MPO about our scenario planning, exploratory modeling. So I think we can spend some time digging into that. I definitely want to highlight, I prefer this to be a discussion, not a lecture. I love hearing myself speak, but maybe you guys not so much. But honestly, I would much rather interact, and that tells me that if what I'm communicating is getting across, and also I want to make sure that what I am saying is understood and relevant. So as much as, I'm not sure Matt or Len how you guys like to, or Scott, how you like to manage the meeting, but I'm happy to have people just kind of speak up and interrupt. That's fine. I think we have a pretty smallish group, so we should be able to manage that. Okay, so with that, let's jump in with the fundamentals. So I told you I meant fundamentals. So what do we even mean when we talk about modeling? What does it mean to model? And a model is a decision support tool. So we all make decisions. We all do some modeling to some degree when we're making those decisions, which means we think about the choice we have to make. We pick out kind of the relevant details or items in that decision. We think about how they're related, and then we kind of put it together, come up with some results of pros and cons, against the decision, and then we make the decision. Of course, that process doesn't make the decision, but it helps us think it through. So if you can answer the question, why did you do something? You used a model. And it might all be in your head. Most of the time it is, but that's what it means to model, is to kind of put these pieces together. We don't always do that. Sometimes we just have our rules of thumb, our heuristics, where essentially there you've already made this decision, and now you're just carrying it out every time you're faced with the same situation. So let me I'll give a quick example. If you're thinking about, what are you going to make for dinner tonight? It's what did I make for dinner last night? Well, Tuesday, so it's Taco Tuesdays. Boom, that's a heuristic. I just do that every Tuesday. A model example might be, look in the fridge. What ingredients do I have? Think about what I had for dinner the previous night. Look at how much time I have before, I want to wrap this up. And then how hungry am I? How much do I want to eat? So that then can tell me, okay, here are the different things that you could make that would meet your needs. What I don't do, what I can't do, is make all of the potential meals that I might make, eat them, and then say, okay, I liked pizza best, so I'm going to make pizza tonight for dinner, right? That's silly. That's why we use models. We do this little bit of abstraction and organizing in that. So I'm really breaking this down because I hear frequently from people when they hear what I do for work, or even talking about people, professionally, about I maintain the regional model. They say, oh, I'm not a modeler. I can't, talk to you about that at all. And even people are very analytical. And it's surprising because we're all modelers in the sense of, we are making decisions. We can think abstractly. We can put them together with our assumptions. And so we can all work with them. Now, I'm not saying I expect everyone who is a stakeholder with the transportation model, the travel demand model, to understand the math in the assignment procedure. That's someone else's job, and we can make sure that job is being done well. But what is really important is that you can ask questions of the model, and the model can reveal itself to you in ways that answer that question, that give you that why, right? That's the test of whether you have a model or just a heuristic. So to come back to my dinner example, if my spouse asks me what we're having for dinner tonight, and I say, oh, it's pizza tonight, and she says, why? I can go back to my model. I can say, well, I have 30 minutes to make dinner. Pizza is something I can make in 30 minutes. And that's there. I leveraged my model. I didn't say, well, it takes me 5 minutes to chop onions. If I'm going to make tacos, then I have to, fry the beef, and that takes me 15 minutes. She doesn't care about that. She just wants to know the why. And then that gives her the information if she wants to try to change that constraint. Well, maybe I can help you, and we can make something more delicious. So what I can't say in response to the why is, my model told me so, and that's the end of it. That's obviously not a useful model, and probably not a model that would be used in the household for much longer. And I'm emphasizing this why because I want us to think about our models and asking the question, not first, what did the model say, but why did the model say it? Because that's actually the information that it's putting together for us. So this is our first step of building up. And you have to have a flow chart when you talk about models. That's actually one of the rules. So I've laid out here very simply from our fundamentals, what are the key components to a model? You need to have inputs. This is the scenario. So that's the, how hungry are you? How much, what do you have for ingredients in the fridge? And you need to have some kind of either theory or assumptions about how those inputs are related. So, how long does it take you to make this, with what reliability, that sort of thing. And then these things need to be interacted, these inputs and assumptions interacted on some type of platform. So that platform is often our own head. Turns out our head is actually not a great modeling platform because we're not very rigorous necessarily in how we weight all of the different inputs and how, unbiasedly we can apply our theories or assumptions, which is part of why we get them out of our heads and onto paper, even on it for a decision tree, or programmed more of a quantitative approach in Excel, or even in the case of transportation, we often get into fancy modeling software, fancy meaning both specific to its capabilities and expensive. But then the model has to produce some kind of results. So what I'm saying is, this is what you need to model. This is a model this flow chart that I'm showing, but it's not the sufficient components to model, to actually conduct a modeling activity. So what's missing? And I feel, oh, Len, do you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, I had, when you said about our heads aren't very good at doing modeling though, I mean, it strikes me that when it comes to understanding what people are going to do in a model, you might want to kind of mimic that kind of activity that goes on in people's heads in order to kind of get a sense of what they're going to do.
So you're referring to, like, if we're thinking about modeling people's behavior, then we need to actually model how people don't always make logical decisions. Is that what you're getting at?
Or consistent decisions. I mean, there is a logic to the decision, but essentially what you're saying in the head is that it's not necessarily consistent with a certain set of expectations, or let me rephrase that. There's a range of behaviors, and sometimes that range is large, and sometimes it's not as large. And so it just struck me that you said the head isn't really good at doing modeling. And I'm thinking, well, but we're trying to model how people are going to behave, in transportation systems. So I know you'll get to this, and I don't want to take up too much time. I just figured I'd chuck that out there. Thanks.
No, that's great. You got kind of meta on me quickly. So it's an excellent point about who we are actually what we are modeling, and that gets to a big challenge of the model. Modeling behavior is not like modeling the natural world or even the weather, that in theory, we could break it down if we just had enough information. There's a lot of uncertainty about how people really make their own decisions, and, like you said, inconsistencies. My point of putting head and calling it out is not a great model platform on this slide is the motivation to get it out of our heads when we're talking about modeling for planning purposes. So if I have a model and I'm saying, oh, this tells me that this is the best project, for our region, but I want to convince you of that model, I've got to get it out of my head and in a format that you can evaluate it and say, okay, yes, I agree with these assumptions. This input, I don't agree with. Let's see what the model would respond to with a different input.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was just pointing that out for the fun of it. Thank you.
No, that's cool. That's cool. That's one of the points I wanted to make. So thank you for that. So what do you really need to model? What was the missing piece? It was you. It was the stakeholder. I feel like I'm ripping off some kind of sleazy ad campaign by saying we're just missing you in this picture. But the stakeholders are a really key part, because if you're modeling and nobody cares, that's not a model. That's just a toy, right? It's producing things that might be fun, but if it's not informing a decision, it's just fun. That's it. So I hope all of this sounds like pretty obvious points so far. But the reason I am bringing this in right at the beginning is when our mindset, when we're building the models, we need to be considering the stakeholder from step zero. What is the need for this model? That's going to influence all of the decisions through the platform, the results, what comes out of it, the platform, how it's structured, and then what inputs and assumptions go into it. And the other thing I want to point out on the slide, I'll bring up my laser pointer, is that the model doesn't give answers. The model gives insights. The stakeholders, they actually have to come up with the answers. Model is not something that tells us what to do. It tells us what it means to have these inputs and related to by these theories and assumptions. So as the stakeholders, I kind of want this is should be our checklist when we're thinking about, can a model help me? How do I engage with models? And that's, like I said, one of the most critical pieces is that stakeholder interaction with the model. So the very first question you should ask when considering using a model for your decisions is, will it help you make a better decision? So the question in transportation terms they shouldn't ask is, does this model predict the future perfectly or accurately? Right? 2020, I think, answers that question pretty definitively. So let's put that aside and focus on, with the outputs of this model, the way it represents it, the system that I want to test, will that help me get better insights into my decision? So if that sounds good, the next thing you have to think through is, can I actually represent my question in a model? So now we're kind of coming back to those other parts of the flow chart. Do you have the inputs? And this is a big challenge. If you're thinking about future scenarios and the future scenario of what's work from home behavior. Maybe we're wondering about what will do we need to expand this roadway because of demand, but then we have a question about what's the work from home behavior going to be. We need to have the inputs of what is the work from home behavior that you want to test in your scenario. So this is where we have models that actually are sequences of representations of our assumptions interacting different inputs. You have to have a platform to represent it. There's a cost there that we'll talk a little bit more about in the use it question. And then I had to put up the two roads diverge in a yellow wood as an example of a decision where a model cannot be described, right? There's no data. I mean, this was Frost's poem. It's all about no information here that can help make the decision. There's no real theory. He ends up just applying a theory retroactively, and that's fine. But retroactive models aren't very good for the planning process. So the usability question, can it be used? That's because there are real constraints, like I said, in collecting the data, organizing it, running the software, and the time for all that to be done. And is that time within the frame where you need to make the decision? And this is even more of a concern when you're using an existing model, because you need to adapt to the structure of that model. And depending on the model, certain questions aren't necessarily appropriate. If you come to the group that applies the regional travel demand model and said, tell me a scenario where there's a lot more scooters out there, what will happen then? That's not an input that the regional model can take in. It needs something much more specific about where they're going to be, how much they're going to cost, who's likely to use them, at what times of day, by what purpose. But other kind of sketch models, may be able to work with that. For going back to my dinner planning model, if we ask the question of, well, what happens if I'm going to increase my food budget by 50%? I don't have any connection to how much I spend at the grocery store and what ingredients are in my fridge when I open the door and check it when it's time to make dinner. So that simple example of that connection that would be missing, and therefore that model is not going to help us. The use it question also has to pertain to the accessibility of this model to other stakeholders. So if it helps you make this decision, but you have other stakeholders involved in the decision, this model has to be something that they can also understand to the degree that they require. So then lastly, this one kind of reiterates a lot of those points, is about, does the model make sense? So what we're not asking is, does this model capture every detail in the real world? It doesn't, it will never, only the real world does. But the making sense question is a good one, because a model that's perfectly useful in one situation may not apply for another application. So if I was to ever go out to eat again, I shouldn't use my dinner planning model to decide what to order off the menu. It's still about, if this tells you what you're going to have for dinner, but that's not a situation where that model makes sense. So the other thing I want to emphasize, and this is a little more on the modeler side, when you're thinking about making sense, what you want to do is test the model, range of inputs, range of assumptions, and see if that response is reasonable within the response that you would want for your particular decision. So you might be saying, oh, models are so great. Now I know how to use them. The components are pretty straightforward. What could go wrong? Well, lots of things, and I can say I've made all of the mistakes on this slide. The number one thing being the inclination to just model everything, to think of anything that might influence this decision, and let's get it all in there, then no one can criticize. We've got all our bases covered. For one thing, you're gonna end up with a much more complex model, and then eroding the usefulness. You have a higher threshold or a higher hurdle for your input data. You're making a lot more assumptions. And if it doesn't provide more insights, then all of that time is just, that's the toy level of modeling, not the work level. Modeling for sake of modeling, this is something that's done without a stakeholder. So kind of similar to the first. The misinterpretation, so this is something that is easy to do as you have more complex tools, right? As we have things that are sequences to build our inputs, we need to actually have another model that produces that. Then if you end up just looking at the end results, it's hard to see where exactly in the chain it came from. So again, it's not good to just take the end result and say, what did it say? It's the why, which may require going back up through your chain of models. And then this last point I want to make about numbers, And it's just an interesting thing where the models represent these inputs and the assumptions in a quantitative form, but those numbers then are pretty easy to take and kind of translate to the real world and say, okay, volume out of the model, that's the same as if I go out and I count cars as they go by, where volume in the model is actually in the context of that model. And that's how it should be considered. It needs to be associated to some kind of real world data and put in that context in order to be applicable for application. Applicable for application is a very redundant phrase. We can take that out in the editing, right? Good. Okay, so with those risks, maybe you're wondering, why do we even embark on this? It seems dangerous. Well, first off, we have to. We are, required to produce certain estimates for our long-range transportation plan. The air quality conformity needs to be met when we are not in conformity. But then beyond that, the model is a very useful communication tool. So if we think about the inputs for our regional model, we have our demographic data and land use data from MAPC. We have the network representations, transit representation, the roadway representation. And we're putting all those pieces together and then revealing, how they're going to interact and how they relate. So it's an enormously powerful communication tool. And I'm showing on this slide just a quick output of the model where Day Boulevard has been selected, and we just said, just tell us where any trips that use this one segment of the network, where else do they go? And it's represented by the width of the link. So the wider the link, the more trips that are also that were also assigned through Day Boulevard. And this actually, when you think about it, this is an amazingly complex and rich amount of data that we're viewing in one glance. I mean, if we broke out these numbers, it would be a table hundreds of lines long with certain values on it. But here we can start to see the actual picture and the story of what's the route and how are trips dispersed on either side of this one segment. And so then this can be really useful when talking through with other stakeholders, because it avoids that fallacy I highlight at the end of the anecdotal evidence of well, every time I use Day Boulevard, I end up on the expressway. That's what everyone's doing. Let's make everything optimal for that. So this can help us be like, well, okay, well, when people aren't going to your house, these are the different paths they might take. And we can also, this is a really nice way to check the model. Do these paths make sense? Are these reasonable routes? I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say about the fundamentals. I'll pause briefly here for a sip of tea and see if anyone has any other questions or comments on that. Yeah, Lynn.
Well, I mean, can you back up?
Yeah,
one. So, in terms of the avoiding anecdotal evidence, I understand that this is one of the benefits of a model, but it's also something that just comes from very good sampling, right? So that you could avoid anecdotes just by doing really good research. Even if you didn't use a model, right? So it's like we should strive to avoid the anecdotes even if we don't use a model, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It is a fallacy to just rely on the anecdote and then extrapolate that out to this is how things work. What's useful about a model is it's hard to, if you program an anecdote, if you really put it in, it should jump out. And so it's like by getting it out of our heads and onto this kind of platform that we would evaluate different inputs and assumptions on, it's harder for those anecdotes to survive.
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at is a little different, and that is that look, I'm a big fan of modeling, and so it's not like I'm trying to say we don't need to model. But I'm just saying that when it comes to avoiding anecdotes, it's not something that applies only to modeling. It should really apply across the board to how we get data, so that we want to have big samples, so that the conclusions that we based on those samples aren't more or less anecdotal.
Absolutely, yeah. So you really, I like what you're speaking to here, and often those samples, that goes into developing both our inputs as well as those assumptions. So we want to make sure that neither of those are, that we want those to be representative of what we're modeling. And if they're not well sampled, we certainly run the risk of bias in either of those.
Thanks.
Were there other hands that went up?
I had my hand up. I just have a quick question. It kind of goes to Len's point, and then you might be moving it. You might discuss it in futures, but I'm assuming this is a living document. Do you have a real-time modeling system that is going to come online? Because given how many changes we're facing, do you have anything that's more real-time?
So like actually a representation of our transportation network, sort of with the most up-to-date status.
Yes, like, you can pretty much, if you use like Google Maps now, you can see like where traffic, if it's heavy. I mean, they base that on all the people they're tracking, the speeds they're traveling and whatnot. But I'm wondering if there's any way you can correlate your modeling system to something similar.
It's a great question. And it definitely, I think it speaks to the use of the model, right? So what are the decisions that a representation of that very up-to-date or real-time network, who are those stakeholders and what are their needs to get insights onto that?
That was one of the things that I was thinking of, and I asked this last year, and I forgot who does it for you. It's not HDM, but somebody does it for you. They tell you like the rush hour traffic, they do all the time updates for you. But given everything we're going through with the pandemic, things are going to change, especially as far as car travel. But they should have the rush hours are no longer 3 to 10 and or no, it's 3 to 8 at night, and then in the morning it's like 7, or no, it's 6 to 10 in the morning and 3 to 7 or 8 at night. I forgot. As far as when I'm concerned, when I'm driving, those need to be updated because rush hour pre-pandemic really started about 4:30 in the morning, and it went till about 11 in the heading towards noon almost. And Friday rush hour especially was ridiculous. So those models, like whoever's making the laws that say, oh, you can use the breakdown lane for such and such a time, that needs to change. And I'm wondering, something like that would be helpful to them.
Yeah, so and we talked about these areas of models. So a lot of that is operational type decisions, right? About like what should the signal timings be based on where people are going, use of breakdown lanes. So that I believe is done through MassDOT. They're like a traffic operations group, but I'm kind of speculating a little bit there. So unfortunately, that's outside of my purview. I'm focused on more of the planning support models, meaning like our planning project investments or kind of large policies. And in those models, it's less important about what's happening today as much as, what might happen over the next 20 or 30 years, more of the lifespan of the project. And they're bigger questions too. It's not just open up a breakdown lane, it's add a new lane to a roadway. Not that that's
I was just trying to think of an example.
Yeah, no. It's a really good question about the inputs and thinking about those sources. So yeah, that makes
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
I don't see anyone.
Great. Okay.
Matt, did you have something to say?
Sorry, I saw a comment in the chat. John, did you have something to say? John McQueen, that is. I apologize.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, I didn't find in the participants a button for the raise your hand.
So for folks who are maybe having difficulty finding the raise hand functions, a recent Zoom update has located it to potentially 2 different locations. One would be under the reactions button, And the other, you may need to open the participants menu and then click on the 3 dots on the right, and it may be in there as well, depending on which version of Zoom you have at the moment.
Okay. Just, Martin, thank you very much. Question in terms of injecting anecdotes, would that come into play when you get the feedback from the stakeholders? Because a lot of that is going to be perceived, not necessarily data-driven, and it might also raise questions about what they see as consequences of the direction that's recommended that haven't been perhaps addressed. And I don't know if consequences are put into the model. For instance, how does a road extension affect salamander protection or things like that, or potential collisions, just things like that. But really, it's more the anecdotal aspect and it being included with the stakeholders.
So ideally, the model wouldn't be driven purely by anecdotal evidence. Now, that said, a model that I'll say that the story that the model is telling, when we actually look back through all the model results and saying the why did we get this particular outcome, why did transit ridership change from X to Y, and we actually walk it back and we say, oh, well, look, with this new route shifted people over and some people stopped driving and changed where they were traveling to. If that story doesn't make sense, right? So if the model's anecdote, everyone's like, well, that would never happen. That's actually a reason to then maybe go back through and check your inputs and check the assumptions in the model. Now, if someone says, an anecdote being like, well, I only take this bus and then I always transfer here, and then I take, then I walk across the highway and I take the subway in or something like that, and you don't have that path in your model, that's something where I think it would be, and in my arbitrary example, it's not necessarily a response where, well, we should change the model so it includes that path of this particular stakeholder, unless it's got to actually demonstrate that this assumption isn't correct. The other side of it is the model's not telling us the answer. It's just telling us these insights. Then we take it and we have to interpret it. And we have to say, okay, well, the model's sending everyone this way, but it has these restrictive assumptions. But we can at least take that and say, some might go, this person's strange way over the highway, others may go the way the model path is going. The other part of your question about sort of the implications of the model outputs, many of the results of this particular model, the regional travel demand model, we then take and post-process. That's how we get to our emissions estimates. We're experimenting with tools that evaluate the health and safety impacts or potential impacts, pivoting off of these results from the model. So that's all possible, but again, it comes back to, can you describe the process, right, in modelable terms? So the effect on salamanders, if you have a model that's telling you how many cars are going down this road, it's up to us to say, well, how do we bridge that to the salamander? Because I can guarantee you there's no salamanders in the model that are going to get run over, based on these modeled cars. Does that help, John?
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Ready to head into the future?
I think so.
All right. So I hope with that kind of fundamentals conversation, part of what I talk about where we're going to go with our modeling tools and how we're going to be, using them in our practice will be more relevant. So first, I wanted to kind of highlight some of what I'm seeing as the trends in the state of the practice in travel demand modeling, as well as the questions and the challenges that we have to help address through these models. So the first off is whether we're focused on, can you give me a very accurate point prediction, or are we trying to cover maybe a broader uncertainty space? And certainly there's this move towards wanting to see a broader prediction that shows more trend results and isn't just saying, here's your target, optimize to that. Now, the move away from, let's say the move away from accuracy, or the emphasis of being able to model uncertainty over accuracy is actually connected also with the next trend. If I can advance my slides here, here we go. The complexity of models to more of a focus on the usability of the model. A model that's hyper-focused on producing very accurate outputs is going to have a lot of complexity to try to capture, you know, the different transit paths that their stakeholder may want to get in there. Okay, well, if I program that in, then I can say, look, I've got the one person that's going to take the other route. And that, one of the challenges is the more complex the model, the harder it is to build, the more likely it is to have errors along the way, and it's going to take longer to run. So those kinds of models we don't run very frequently. You're not going to be able to cover a lot of scenarios. The other side of moving towards usability from, you know, something that is more useful for searching across uncertainty is a model that's more accessible to the stakeholder. So emphasizing that stakeholder role, that means you can't have a model with all these convoluted paths and dependencies. That's going to be very difficult to kind of tease out the story and make sense of it. So then the third trend that I'm seeing is a move from the desire to design one unified modeling platform that does everything into something that's more kind of right-sized, you know, suite of focused tools in the model, or focused modeling tools, I should say. So that sounds good, right? I mean, having a specialized tool, that sounds like the right thing to do. You know, what's the downside? Well, the trouble is, each of those specific tools aren't necessarily going to be consistent with each other. So if we consider, you know, our model A in the toolbox versus model B, model A might say your VMT in this base scenario is 10 million. Model B, VMT is 11 million. Now, if we're looking at this model A versus B and saying these models are predicting the future, we can't have two futures. It's got to be 10 or 11. You know, which one is it? Let's evaluate the inputs and assumptions and throw one of them out, or make adjustments so that they both agree. But if instead we're considering, and where we want to move to, is consideration of those models useful for insight, which means we want to see their response. So, and those responses might be different. Model A might say, well, scenario Y has a 5% higher VMT than scenario Z. Model B says Y has a 10%, 5 versus 10%. That's good information, because that's giving you now another perspective on your same scenario, but with different assumptions, different inputs, they're different models. But now maybe you could kind of think about ranges of potential responses. But it's a bit to let go of, that the model doesn't always produce the same number, but that's a very constraining view, and focused a lot on accuracy over the usability and exploring uncertainty. So just a quick review. This is we're doing kind of a strategic plan on our demand modeling tools, and this is what we've set out for that long-term goal. I'm not going to go through the whole goal. I just want to highlight a few things that I think are most salient for this group, and that is our emphasis on documentation. Like I said, stakeholders need to be able to understand our modeling tools. Engaged and informed stakeholders, that is part of our modeling long-term goal. The model without a stakeholder, it's just a toy. And again, our team of modelers, they need to be able to communicate how things are represented in the model itself and what the implications are that's coming out. And I'll also note that there's nothing about the specific modeling tool as part of this long-term goal. It's not like we want to have this particular model, it's the best one, this is what they're selling now, because all of that has to be driven from the needs to then motivate the model design. So our approach right now that we're working through to get to this goal, we're working with a steering committee that includes members across the MPO, as well as at MAPC and MassDOT. And so they're helping us. We've kind of set out our guiding principles of modeling. How do we think about it? A lot of those are reflected in today's presentation. We've gone through a needs assessment based on the last LRTP. Where does the model need to, it's most needed to support our planning and policy decisions. And then we're focused on kind of a 3 timeframe track. Near term, we have a current model that can always be improved, and essentially we'll evolve that practice and opportunistically grab things from our midterm, which is going to be our next LRTP, 2023 LRTP. So that's where we're focusing a lot of effort to actually design and develop a new model from the ground up. And it's going to support our exploratory modeling practice along the way. And then in the long term, we really want to think about that suite of tools, right? The full, like, fill up that toolbox and identify the new types of tools and practices to meet more of our long-term and evolving needs. I'll just keep rolling, but please, anyone who wants to ask a question, unmute and jump in. So I think I've already kind of highlighted the active work. Oh yeah, John. Did you have a question, John?
There we go.
There we go.
And make myself visible again. A question in terms of the applicability of some of the modeling, and let's say moving into our next point or next section, which is the chapter 5 of the LRT of the needs assessment, the system preservation and modernization. Could, for instance, if we had a VMT measurement in place, let's say for tolls or assessments or things like that, but vehicle miles traveled with a GPS that would monitor types of vehicles, weights of vehicles, and all that would be input in their background. Could you use a model to determine and project when a particular road or pavement really is going to need more serious attention because it has a higher concentration of truck traffic than previously thought, for instance?
Yeah, actually, I believe those types of models are in place. And Mass DOT, I believe, does all of the pavement maintenance and management. So I think I'm blanking on the name of that model, but essentially it's what you described, right? Looking at the usage of the model, or excuse me, usage of the roadway, quality of pavement, and I know they're looking now in like the research terms of what are going to be implications of more regular inundation through, extreme rainfall or even or sea level rise on that pavement. So yes, I mean, that's if you think of it like a process, then you can model it, and that's definitely something that I know is supported by analytical tools.
Because I guess the piece that is missing currently is having VMT.
And I want to say they had something about.
Well, it's Governor Baker has torpedoed the pilots and things like that for that. I think it was really to kind of get more of a handle on funding based like a utility meter for assessing people charges for roadway use. So
where I can, so it's what I should be talking about is, my area of expertise, which is not specifically the pavement condition representation, but on the demand side and the response to pricing, that's solidly on our travel demand tools, wheelhouse. And so, because you may want to ask the question of like, if you add these other kinds of user charges, what would be the response, right? I mean, we have a lot of assumptions on our model and how it's going to be making those trips. But if you're pricing one roadway, what other roadways might people shift to? Who's going to be affected by pricing at certain points? We have different representations of patterns of travel, so that kind of thing. So I would say, it's one of those questions that I think you'd want to look at from several different perspectives, right? To actually get that insight, and then you can kind of think through your stakeholders too, of who's going to be impacted by this, and let's see if we can best understand what that impact looks like.
Yeah, I guess my point was just to get a little more validation of the VMT tool that it has a lot of different uses and benefits, more than just charging drivers.
Mhm.
And that you and MassDOT would get a lot more direction, for instance, in terms of more real-time behavior.
So I'm not familiar with what you cited there from the governor, but let me make a note and see if I can talk to our partners at MassDOT about what they see from that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and Marty, I just wanted to jump in. I can't raise my hand because I'm a co-host, but John, if I have this correct, John Bishard last year came to the MPO to talk about MassDOT's efforts to analyze pavement using their pavement serviceability index, as well as some of the tools, and they kind of look at this for a 10-year horizon. This may not be exactly what you're talking about, but I do have a video of the presentation from April 16th where he talked about it. So this might be aligned, and maybe Marty, we can check back and kind of about what this is, but I'm going to share it in the chat just in case you're interested.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Send me a link to that. But again, this is a tool that he would benefit from, because it doesn't exist in Massachusetts. The measurement of VMT, like real time, with, let's say, GPS and the chip embedded in your license plate.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry, I think I misunderstood your point at first. So you're talking about this new potential data source.
Yes.
If this pricing goes forward, that's been, yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly, that would be enormously valuable data.
Thank you.
I think you're sparking other questions.
Yes.
I have a quick question based on what John just asked as far as VMT. That would, I've been involved in several groups for that information, and the problem with VMT, it would have to be a federal program, because we have cars and trucks that travel interstate. So to get that tabulated, each state, to get the apportioned money they require for planning a given project or a given roadway, they really need to know who's traveling through the state. So I think that's going to be, that's a can of worms. I think that's kind of why people shy away from VMT, period. That's it. I just wanted to interject what I learned.
Thank you. Are we anyone else with a question? Okay, cool. So I think I'm on the agenda until a little after 1/2 Is that correct, Scott and Matt?
That is correct.
Okay, let me speed things up a little bit. I hope this discussion's been worthwhile at the pace I've been going. I think I mentioned active model. Oh, so this is something I wanted to highlight. This is something we're very proud of. We've integrated a utility that FHWA has built called the Exploratory Modeling and Analysis Tool. And so what this lets us do is actually specify our inputs not by a single point, but across a range. And then this tool will leverage our existing model to do a sample across the modeling range, and then it produces a much denser plot, or the opportunity to. Essentially, it makes a fast model of our slow model. It uses the slow model to get some samples and says, that's all I need from you, does the fast model, and then we can produce these very dense scatter plots. These are 10,000 outputs from that fast model. So it's like we ran our regional model that takes half a day to run 10,000 times and painted this picture. So this is something we've been kind of playing around, experimenting with work from home, changing work from home behavior, and changing autonomous vehicle impacts on the roadway. And I'm not even going to bother describing how we represented that, but already you know, looking at these two plots, you can see the work from, so these are plotted by VMT. Work from home behavior is obviously driving most of the show. It's a pretty dense line, very strong trend as work from home increases with a decrease in VMT, as opposed to our AV, that it's a wide spread of points. Now we're also varying the work from home, which is why we get such a wide spread, but it does have its own trend. There certainly is a correlation there. It's just not anywhere near what it is for the change in work from home. So that's the kind of the way that we'd like to start analyzing and discussing our model outputs. And then the kind of information we're getting is not, well, what will be the VMT, you know, with pick a point, work from home, you just pick that point right in the middle. It's what's the trend as work from home increases, decreases, what are the ranges we're talking about, as opposed to what other kinds of policies or projects we have going along with that. So just this is a good point to end on, and then I have those other slides there as a reference, Len, if you want to dig into the scenario planning stuff. But just where you're going to be hearing more from us. So we have that steering committee ongoing. So we were engaging with those stakeholders. We're planning on having a broader peer review of that next LRTP, our 2023 LRTP model. So we're going to be presenting our conceptual design of the model, kind of major components, what it's going to do, how it's going to work, but still have a lot kind of left up for discussion and decision. So we want to engage with a broader group of stakeholders there to get their input while where we still are building and designing, and then finalize that plan kind of towards the summer and fall. Throughout this year, we're going to be working closely with Kate White on the Big Ideas initiative, and so this is hopefully supporting that through using that exploratory modeling tool to test out some of the different concerns that we get from those focus groups. All of this is going to be converging to support the next 2023 LRTP, with that scenario planning happening next year, 22. And we'll be certainly going to the MPO board to communicate and preparing for the peer review, following the peer review results, and then as things start to converge in that development. Yeah, Len.
I guess before I say something, can you explain a little bit more about the peer review process?
Sure. So it's actually, we haven't yet defined who would be the participants in that. So right now, our steering committee is a total of 6 folks, 4 within CTPS, and then Tim Reardon from MAPC and Bob Fry from MassDOT. So we're thinking that we certainly want to engage some of the other agency partners, Massport, MBTA, maybe from someone from Mass Highway, but then also, consultants that work with those agency partners are often using our model output. So we'd like to get some of those voices on the board, and then other stakeholders. So part of the reason I wanted to highlight that here is to get any input. And Len, it's okay if you want to nominate yourself for this peer review.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I really have the expertise, to do that, so I hate to take up a seat that someone else would serve much better in, or be much better for you to have. But I'll tell you, I think the value to the stakeholder comes from the confidence that we have in the work that you're doing. So I'm going in 2 directions with this, or I have 2 threads on this. One is that we use the modeling in order to do the build no bill scenario on the long range plan, the projects in that, and you get out 20 years from now, and when it comes to trying to determine whether there are disparate impacts or disproportionate benefits, the uncertainties, I think, get so great that it's hard to say that there's going to be a difference between one or another, and so I question just the value in going out that far. So that's one thing, and you don't really have to respond to that. The other thing, and you've heard this from me, is that it would really be good, when we do a set of predictions or a run, let's say, I know that we're looking 20 years out, but it'd be really great if we could take the outputs 5 years out and then look 5 years from now and see how it matches up. And I know that in the past I've asked whether you back test, and the argument has always been, well, the model's different now, and so we can't really back test because we don't have the same inputs or whatever that we put into the previous model. I'm not saying that correctly, but I think you get the point. And so going forward, I just let's if we can spit out the results 5 years from now, and then 5 years from now let's commit to looking at how the model predicted what happened, and then you can maybe get a better sense of how to tweak in 5 years from now or 3 years from now. Thanks.
I mean, so those two comments, I think, demonstrate that you certainly have the capabilities to contribute to this peer review. I'm just going to say that, no pressure, but just saying that. But I'm really glad you highlighted the DIDB, because that's actually, in case other folks aren't familiar, so this is a process done where actually many model runs were done. It's similar to what I was describing in the exploratory modeling analysis tool, but run with variations on the inputs, with the intention of finding the distribution of the outputs across that range, and then comparing that distribution against the change we see between the build, no build. So that's actually something we're setting up to rerun with this new tool. And I think we may get slightly different results, or at least we'll be able to parse them more, I don't want to say exactly, we'll be able to peel them apart. So right now the DIDB shows just the error across the terms, but it doesn't tell us the why. Why is it ranging so much? And the model, that's what the model can say. It can say, I got this output from this input. That's what it does. So this new tool actually helps us kind of parse that out, and I think in a more informative manner that will then help us not just say too much uncertainty, we can't say anything, but actually say that this is the source of the difference. And so, if there isn't a disparate impact showing in one case versus the other, why not? I mean, that would be really good information. And then, because then we can go back and say, well, that input actually, what if it doesn't vary as much? Then we might have a concern. But I really like your other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. No, I like what you just said there. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, but I also want to comment on the backcasting prod that you're giving me again, and it's a great one. I mean, it's because we forecast and we say, oh, we have nothing to compare against, the the models. Okay, the backcast again, it's going to be very interesting. Not just did the model, does it represent what happened before or not? It's the why, right? What's different in the assumptions we had when we ran that model versus what actually came to pass. So if we're only looking 5 years out, hopefully things didn't change that much, and we think we have some good confidence in our inputs, but maybe something did change. Maybe there was a travel behavior that really shifted in that time, and that can help us think about our next round of models. So it's a really good practice. But they're not just pushing you off when they say it's difficult. It's we can't do it. It's hard, right? Because you have to get all of that consistent data from way back. It's different formats, convert it over. It is something that's on my list to look at least consider for validation of this new model platform.
No, I understand that. I totally get that. And so, but really what I'm saying is let's plan going forward. That we just like when you do the run now. And I know it's easy to ask for these things, but not necessarily easy to do. Just spit out the data, the predictions for 5 years out. So you're running it for 20 years. To give us information as to how to make decisions. 20 years. With respect to whatever policies, but take the output at 5 years. And then 5 years from now, let's look at how things turned out. So we're preparing for the future by spitting out the data when we do the run now. And let's not bother with going back, because I know we have limited resources, but let's just plan for that in the future. That's all I ask. Thanks.
That's cool. Thank you. Yeah. That question, I feel like we could go the next hour kind of breaking that down. And I mean, I'd love to. So maybe at a future date, we can walk through the piece. I think that question of how could we do that and what would that tell us is a really good kind of thought exercise. And I think will help you understand too the steps of the model, right? Where the challenges are, and then we make sure what are we getting out of it.
You're asking to come back. That's great. Thanks.
I think we've got time for maybe one more question. I see Sarah Lee's hand is up.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. Marty, this is probably just a more general question about the model and how it is used for local projects. So I guess I'll frame my question around, I'm most familiar with a recent project that was done. It was the Arbor Way redevelopment project near Forest Hills, and the Ctps model was used to help predict how much volume would be in the future and how many lanes should be built to accommodate that volume. There was a lot of pushback from a variety of folks involved in that project. And this was years ago, but I'm just kind of using this as a reference point. People saying that it wasn't appropriate to use the CTPS model for something like this project. And what the reasoning was, I'm not totally sure. I'm not sure if it was the scale of the project or that it was only a certain number of intersections or something like that. But it might be helpful if you could just give a quick statement about when it's appropriate or not appropriate to use the CTPS model for projects like that, just so we can know moving forward, good versus not good cases to reference the model. That'd be really helpful.
That's that's a great kind of suggestion. It's having this guidance around this particular tool, and certainly why I think a suite of tools is more appropriate. So we kind of see it across the spectrum based on what is actually being evaluated, and also how specifically we can be defining that particular project. If it's a very high level generic definition, it's not something we can represent in these spatial tools, but maybe if it's more about operations, then the regional model can be too abstract, right? There's that range of more or less detail. So when is it appropriate to use a model? This is the fundamentals, Sarah. So you have to ask, right? Like, is it going to help make a better decision? And part of that is a question about what are the assumed sensitivities of the model. And so I'm not familiar with the Arborweed project, so I'm not sure if what was actually being changed there. I'm assuming it did have the model was sensitive to that change. So we did see a response in the model. But then, is that response appropriate? Does it make sense, right? That is one of the questions that should be asked whenever we're considering using this tool, and that it's appropriate. So unfortunately, I can't I wouldn't want to have like a hard and fast line, because it's really, I think it's almost, I don't want to say it's a mindset. It's like a mindset about how we think of these tools, because again, they're not telling us the answer, right? They're giving us some insights. And I know, absolutely, it's being used to develop point predictions, and that is a requirement of our model, and it's how it's being applied. But I think we can all see that there are challenges to considering the model's use in these different ways, on all sides, on the tool side, on the modeler's side, but also on the stakeholder side and what they're expecting out of it. So I'm trying to not answer your question in many different ways. I hope I've been successful. I saw Tegan raise her hand, so I think she was throwing me a lifeline as well.
I didn't need to, honestly. You've done such a good job talking about the conundrum, right, around modeling and how it's intended to be useful. So I only wanted to add to what Marty already said, is that there shouldn't be a hard line of like, is it right or wrong? It's really a decision process that should be done with the stakeholders. But then again, in certain projects, there's simply a requirement to produce certain numbers. And sometimes you have to use the tools you have to produce or to respond to requirements. But no matter what, I think the key with a lot of these projects is how are those numbers being communicated? And are they being used as a reason to dictate a design, or are they being used as a decision support tool that helps people understand what kinds of decisions they're making and what the potential impacts might be? So I think that communication piece of how the results, if it does need to be run, even if it doesn't, whatever, however those results are being used is a key part of this question, not just when to use model. Did I also not answer your question?
No, I think both of you really kind of hit it on the head there, that I think sometimes the information from the model has been put on the table. Here it is, here's the answer, here's what we need to frame our design around, and that's been difficult, I think, in the past for people to kind of understand, given, you know, the black box. I think we've all referenced the model as a black box years ago. I think that's changing, which is really promising. So I totally hear you, and I think you're totally right that the communication around the outputs and how they're used is extremely important moving forward. So I really appreciate your eye on that.
If I may just add slightly more, these are exactly the conversations, Sarah, that we want to have as part of this process of evolving these new tools, which is to make sure that we're not evolving a new black box, that we're actually evolving something that is something that people have input into and understand what it is and how to ask questions. And that is our fundamental goal here. So these conversations, I hope, will continue while Marty embarks on the enormous task that is ahead of him right now.
Well, thanks, Marty, and thanks for the questions to those of you who asked them. I thought it was really an informing presentation.
Excellent. Glad to hear that.
Thanks, Marty.
Thanks for the
Really
opportunity.
appreciate it.
Me too. Matt, are you ready to take the screen back?
Yep, I'm just having a slight technical problem, by which I mean I accidentally exited out of the the last presentation. Thank you so much for holding while I get that up. We're sharing it right now. There we go. Thanks again, Marty. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
So we ran a bit over on that segment right there, but we're next thing we're going to move on to is the discussion of I think it was chapter 6 of or chapter 5, can't remember which, but of the needs assessment, and just, you know, that it was about, you know, the system preservation and state of good repair for the transportation system as a whole. And I read through it and I thought it was a pretty interesting read on, you know, you've heard so much about this. I don't know, I started hearing more about it when Stephanie Pollock took over. Now she's gone off to the feds, but it's a very important part of what we need to do. I know that a lot of people would like to see us move into the future of, you know, and be at the cutting edge, but we really need to just maintain our system while also looking at what we can do to bring us into the 21st century. So I guess we can just open it up to any thoughts or questions people had about the reading material. That was chapter 5, by the way. Well, I guess
I have my hand up, but I guess you can't see me.
Oh, sorry, I was
no
switching around different screens there.
Yeah, no problem. So, and I'm gonna try and save us a little time. John McQueen referenced it, so I know he at least read some part of it, and so I appreciate that. I'm gonna try to save a little time by merging what I have to say, you know, with the chair's report from the MPO meeting. And so the biggest thing I have to say was that the last MPO meeting, Matt Genova gave an update on what we will potentially have to spend for this current cycle, and due to increases in the costs associated with various projects, it looks like we'll have in the range of $3 million to spend, which is pretty much nothing. And so we're gonna have to deal with that, and I don't want to make it seem like more than it is. It's just a challenge. It's a big challenge, but I think it may point to maybe what we should focus on as an MPO, if certain kinds of projects are going to be subject to cost increases by the nature of the way in which we do our programming. And by that, I mean that we pretty much put projects, I think, into the tip when they are 25% design, or I guess somewhere between 25 and 50% design. And as they go through the design process, and please take it anyone else here. I mean, if I'm getting my numbers wrong, please jump in and correct me, because I won't be embarrassed, and I just don't want to, give wrong information out. So we put them in when they are partially designed, and then as they become more designed, and then things come up, and they start costing more. But once they're programmed, we as an MPO have this policy where we are going to, sorry, put on my video, where we're going to keep them in the tip, and we are committed to the full cost of them. And I understand the rationale for that, especially since we've already headed down that road with certain projects, because municipalities plan on it, and they put a lot of resources in place to it, so you don't want to pull the rug out from under them. But still, it gets us into a situation where we find ourselves now, where we have really nothing to spend for that 5th year out, which would be 2026 in this case. So I think we'll have a discussion about how to approach that. And one of the things in reading chapter 5 is that I see a lot of things that can be done with respect to preservation and modernization that are low in cost, and seemingly stable, in the likelihood that they will increase in cost. For example, when it comes to pedestrians, apparently we don't have a really good library, for lack of a better word, database, a slightly better word, of sidewalks, because they're controlled by the municipalities. And so that is something we could set out to do as an MPO. And that's pretty much labor costs. Yeah, they could go up, but it's not going to be like in the case of one project, you dig down and then you find there's a big concrete slab or something underneath, and it's going to cost you a whole lot more to remove that concrete. So I think there are projects that we can take on where we can be reasonably confident, that the cost we can get out of control. And I'll toss into this, when we had a person come to the MPO from Virginia to talk about cost benefit analysis, how to incorporate that into the process. One of the things that they discovered was that the smaller projects gave a much higher cost benefit rating. And to the extent these smaller projects, in theory, will have a smaller probability of increasing in costs, then that would be good. But let's say they don't. Well, still though, even if they go up in costs, let's say 20%. Well, if it's a small project, then it can only go up so much. Whereas a bigger project, let's say I don't want to name any names, but let's say the project's costing $100 million and we're allocating out, $25 million a year, and it goes up 20%. Well, that can have a pretty big impact on the budget. So we might want to see ourselves aiming for these smaller projects. And if we're going to do a big project, then maybe just do like one big one in every 5 years or so. So if its costs go up, well, it's not going to eat up the whole budget or most of the budget. So that's my thinking along those lines. But I think as the MPO, I think with only $3 million in the 5th year and seemingly projects are going up in cost, I think what we're probably going to have to focus on in the near term is preparing projects that have been programmed in 2025 for the likelihood that they may have to be pushed back as we grab money from those in order to fund overruns that are happening in the 21 to 24 time frame. Probably not program anything for 2026, and then decide how we will spend the money, for 2027. Those are my thoughts, early thoughts. But I just put that out there so that you all can think about it and give me feedback, perhaps at the next meeting, so that if we are asked to make a statement, or something along those lines, we will be prepared to do so. So that's my combination of my thoughts about the Chapter 5 of the needs assessments and the chair's report. Questions, comments, whatever.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that I think it makes a lot of sense what you were talking about with choosing certain projects that could have a bigger impact for less of a cost. I had heard that there wasn't a good inventory of sidewalks, but until reading this through, I didn't realize how few that we actually, like, there's really not, I can't remember, there was a percentage they had, and it was just a tiny percentage of like what was documented. It's basically just sits in each town hall, I guess. I think Franny might have her hand up.
Yeah, I can see system preservation would warrant a focus on the importance of maintaining, but I guess I haven't read this report in entirety, but modernization needs, at first glance, it seems like this focuses a lot on maintenance, maintaining the status quo. Can someone comment on how it talks about electrification and how it talks about unification, like the need to connect north and south, or are those in different chapters and this is only looking at maintaining the equipment as we have it? Which I would think system preservation would be, but I thought modernization would include. So I'd love to hear. I probably missed I did not read it. I apologize, in detail. So I need somebody to just sort of fill me in on where electrification fits in.
Yeah, I mean, they do reference, there's a part about like obsolete, basically things assets that whoever, maybe the MBTA, or any of the various agencies own, that are just, rather than being in a state of disrepair, they're more obsolete. And they did actually in one part specifically reference the electrical grid and the need to upgrade it, to be able to withstand things like natural disasters and things like that, because we've seen in the past few years that there's been several failures that kind of brought the system to its knees. I don't know if I know where you're coming from as far as needing to like unify the system better and bring it into the 21st century, and it's really a balancing act on how do we keep the services we have running at right now while also looking to the future. But I do think specifically on the electrification thing, those two are completely related. Like you can't even keep the system running if you don't have the electricity to do it. I know you're also talking about future electrification of things like the commuter rail, which is a bigger picture idea. I see Ann McGann's hand is up, so maybe she has something to say on this.
Yeah, so this chapter is specifically, so the way the needs assessment is set up, it's by our 6 goal areas. And you guys are looking at each goal area at each meeting. So this is just system preservation and modernization, which talks about maintaining and modernizing the system. And it also includes sections on making the system more resilient. So the next chapter, which I think you'll probably do at the next meeting, capacity management and mobility, is going to, talk about some of those things. We don't talk a lot about electrification. It's basically, that would be stakeholder input, because we have different sections in each chapter is analysis we've done and then stakeholder input in what we've heard. So I believe that the electrification would also fall under the goal area of the clean air and sustainable communities as well. So it's just not this chapter.
Okay, I guess I want to make sure that we're not, but we're not limiting ourselves based on, I mean, if we have to raise taxes, if we have to find new revenue, then we have to. But I would hate to think that we're planning based on insufficient funding right now when we're thinking about planning for the future, and the fact that we have to move quickly to plan. I always get worried that of course we have to upkeep, and people are saying, well, there's not enough money, so we're just going to have to keep the status quo.
Right, so basically what we're doing is we have to look across all 6 goal areas, and we have to, and that's what we do. We evaluate all of the projects that come in based on all of these, and they're scored. And then you look at the project as a whole as to how many of these goal areas is it going to help, is it going to benefit? So so that's kind of what it is. We look at these separately in each goal area, but the other pieces will come up in the other goal areas as you review that.
Yeah, and it's like it kind of shows the realism that you need to take sometimes. Like when I was looking at the goals for like the percentage of pavement that is in poor condition, like I think the goal was something like 30%, which you'd think to yourself, like in a perfect world, the goal would be 0%, but is that how can you do that? But I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but.
So since Ann is here, Ann, can you answer a question for me? So what is an access control arterial? Is that like, does that mean like it has a light on it or something?
I was wondering that myself.
Access controlled is basically, it's like it doesn't have it has specific points where you can enter or exit. It's not like your local roads where your driveways are coming out. It's like access control means that it's, it has exits.
Like more like a parkway or something?
Yeah, you can't enter and exit at just any point.
Right. So it seemed like the roads that had no access control were the ones that had the lowest like quality or were in the worst shape. Was that the correct reading of that?
I would have to look. I haven't read it in a while.
No,
so
yeah, no problem. You don't have it memorized, Ann. Oh my goodness. So I know you had it memorized, but now you're working on the next one. So I get it. Yeah. Okay. So that was interesting. And I think they were the ones that had the lowest quality roads, and a lot of them were seemingly in the inner city municipalities. So yeah, that was interesting. So the whole point of this is for us to really get a sense of what the system looked like in the last cycle there, and what we set out to accomplish, because we're going to have the next needs assessment. So we have a good sense of the previous cycle. We can, I think, make better comments when it comes to the next cycle.
What is the timing on that, Glenn? I mean,
we're actually doing it right now. We're starting the update of the needs assessment now, and then the next plan we have to adopt it in 2023. So we're hoping that the needs assessment will be completed for the end of 2022, so that information can be used when we're developing the next plan.
Okay, thank you for all this work. So it says MAPC. Is this where MAPC and MassDOT cross?
I'm not sure what says MAPC.
Oh, maybe I read it wrong at the beginning of the document on Destination 2040. I might have read it wrong. I was thinking which agency is responsible for this. I thought it said MAPC, and I thought, oh, it's not CTPS or.
No, this is the Boston MPO's long range plan.
Okay.
Are you thinking of MAPC's Metro Common?
Yeah, no, I think I was mixing them up. When I saw Metropolitan, Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization, I think I read it wrong. And so I was thinking, wait, okay, so it is.
Yeah, no problem. No, it's a branding issue.
Okay.
I feel it's like without transportation in the name of what we're doing, it's like, of course you gotta think it's MAPC type stuff, because I mean, they're all about the planning, but we don't have transportation anywhere, you know, in our name. I mean, I understand why, but still, I mean, it's like, but then why wouldn't people think that it has, or why would people think it has anything to do with transportation? Because there's no transportation in it, you know, in the name.
Okay. no,
Anyways,
I get it now. Okay. It
yeah,
makes
cool.
sense. Anyway,
So I'll stop.
I apologize, but I have to leave. I didn't know if anybody had any other questions, but I have to leave
No
now.
problem. We'll be doing chapter 6 over the next two months because it's a long one. It's 100 pages, but I think it's the heart. Well, it's my favorite section. So anyways, just let you know.
Okay,
And
and I'll see you then.
all right, take care.
All right, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Bye.
I did want to share a comment that I got through the chat, which just said that the data inventory and condition of sidewalks is generally lacking, and that municipalities should be incentivized to conduct inventories and grade the condition of their sidewalks, which I just wanted to convey that. That was from John McQueen, to give full credit.
I can probably the comment.
And I see that David has a question.
Yeah, just because you're mentioning, I just thought I'd share that I know Needham recently did an inventory of its sidewalks, and I question how useful that would be to spread that knowledge far and wide, just because it seems like the circumstances by which those sidewalks came into being wouldn't necessarily apply to every town. I mean, it was sort of like there was post-World War. There was a great eagerness to have lots of sidewalks, and so they built them willy-nilly all over the place, and then they realized a few decades too late that it costs a lot of money to keep them maintained, and so they are finally getting around to giving some concerted thought about how to potentially reduce that inventory. I'm just not entirely clear how that data shared broadly would be useful to other municipalities, but that's just a thought.
All right. Well, that's a good thought. Yeah, I'll shut up. You know, thanks, Scott.
I'm sorry, Scott. I did want to share another comment that came in through the chat. I don't want people to feel shortchanged. Just a comment from Chris Porter that it would be nice to move to a measure of high quality, low stress network accessibility for bikes, rather than just population and jobs in proximity to facilities, which I think is an interesting idea.
Yeah. Thanks.
I did just want to say quickly to Scott and Len that we are running out of time, and Chris is on the agenda, and where people are leaving the meeting, and I do feel like Chris's point should be heard in case people have time commitments following 4:15. Would you folks be amenable to having him present, and then we go back for the other agenda items?
Sure.
I mean, we can also punt it to the next meeting if people would prefer.
I think you started off now. As much as you can.
All right. So, Chris, if you're still up for it, we'll jump ahead and then we'll work our way back.
Okay. Yeah. So I woke up on January 2nd thinking about how long I'd been on the RTAC and sort of thinking, gee, maybe it's time to do something different. And I realized I'd been on for 16 years this spring, at least. And that started to get me thinking about term limits and whether there'd be something of value for RTAC to consider with having individuals term limited to something like 10 or 12 years. And there's, I think, a number of possible benefits to this. I mean, most of the committees and groups I've been involved with, try to keep some level of turnover. I was on the Cambridge Bicycle Committee. They have a 10-year period after which, you have to rotate off. And, the idea is to get turnover, to get fresh blood, and to also give people the opportunity or the space to kind of move on and do other things and not have lifetime appointments. I think this issue has been discussed somewhere, certainly in the past in RTAC. I remember during my tenure it being discussed. I know there's always concerns brought up about, particularly with the difficulty of recruiting people to serve on the committee. I think there's, a number of possible reasons for that, none of which I think are super good excuses for, for having people serve lifetime terms. Certainly on the citizens group side, it is challenging to take, a few hours out of your day once a month. It's challenging to find people who can do that. But I'm hoping that maybe in the future, after the pandemic is over, maybe we can keep doing, if the state allows us, some level of virtual meetings, which really reduces the amount of time that you need to commit to this during the middle of what for some people is a work day. But other reasons that I've heard is that it's hard to, it's an esoteric topic. It's hard to find people who are interested or understand it. There's a steep learning curve. Maybe all those are true, but I think in terms of the learning curve, I think we need to do a better job of explaining what we do. And I know with Tegan preparing, onboarding materials for the MPO board, it's maybe something we could take, make use of to explain what the process we're involved in is and how it works. I think in terms of, is what we're doing important and useful? I sure hope it is. And if it's not, maybe we shouldn't be here. And if it is, maybe we need to find a better way of explaining and communicating what that is. But I just think, I think it's really important to get turnover and, and I know we have regular rotation of the agency staff and the city and town staff, but much less so on the citizens groups or some of the other groups. And I think it's something that we should consider, for kind of making it a healthier group in terms of actually setting something like a 10 to 12 year term limit on individual memberships, after which the member organizations are basically need to go back and recruit somebody else from their membership. So I'm just throwing that out there, and love to discuss it more at some point, if not today, depending on timing. And just to make it clear, so when I came to that conclusion, I also, I guess because I haven't widely announced this, but I did decide to that I should time off of the RTAC. I figured I would see the 3C process through this spring, but then go off in July. And I've been talking with Mass Bike about finding a replacement and helping them do that.
Wow, I'm so grateful to you for all your work. And I think those questions of like, what do we do? Who's doing it? For how long? I think they resonate with me. And they're never clear. And so I thank you for sort of raising them so that we can sort of crystallize a little bit some of those things. So thanks. Even though
anyone have any, sorry, go ahead, Franny.
I'll be sorry not to have you on this committee, Chris, but I totally understand that.
Yeah, thanks, Franny. I appreciate that. And it's certainly been an interesting and time for me, and I will miss interacting with everybody on the committee, but yeah, that's. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say personally, Chris, I appreciate all the work that you've put in for so many years, chairing the 3C committee, do really great work there. And you'll be very much missed. Of course, the door is still open if you want to, come back just as a member of the public to drop by. We'll of course have you. But I also did want. Oh, I'm sorry, Len. I didn't see your hand raised. I'm going to stop talking. Go ahead, Len.
Go on, you finish your thought.
Oh, so I was just going to say that this process, we don't need to make. I feel like we do not need to make a snap decision on this. We can take the time to fully discuss it. It would necessitate amending the bylaws. And I also wanted to throw out the possibility of, having a subcommittee discuss this further. And of course, we would discuss it in the group in general, but I did want to throw out that as a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to make any decisions today. I mean, this is going to be a long process. I mean, we'll give it, this is an introduction introduction to it. I mean, we'll spend more time on it next month, and I can give some of my thoughts at that point in time. But I'm going to stop now just so that if we do have minutes, and we can approve them, we can, and then Scott can determine what we do for the rest of the time.
I just wanted to see, I think Montgomery has a question or a comment.
Oh, thanks. Sorry to run it out, but echo all the accolades for Chris. I think in many ways he's accomplished a lot of our deliverables as a committee have been owe a lot to him over the years. I also just want to say, I think if we do, I highly encourage that we talk more about membership, but I think we should think about the questions of membership being broader than just the term limit question. I think there are other questions about how we entice new membership it's more than just how do we look at ourselves and the people in this room and on this website, on this Zoom, and how do we ourselves prevent our own burnout. But it raises the question, if we're not here, who will be? And I think we should look at that holistically, not just how do we get ourselves out, but where will the new people come from, and what's our role in trying to make that happen?
I just have to put it in kudos to the staff, I think, because the staff is so good and carries on with everything. In some ways, it's like, well, I can speak up about this, or I can just let them continue doing their good work. So it's sort of, sometimes our raison d'etre isn't clear to me. And I know we should be talking, we are advisory to the MPO, but all these talents and activities and decision-making powers really get very melded in my mind. And
yeah,
being clear, but it's very hard.
And to David's point also, I mean, when I was talking about this with Scott and Lynn, the question came up, well, you're talking about term limits for individuals or organizations? And I hadn't thought about it as organizations, and I'm not necessarily suggesting that, but you're right, there are, I mean, organizations kind of wax and wane. There are other advocacy groups that have grown up in the last few years. There may be others that maybe are less active. So, but there should be a process, I think, for considering, that membership at that level as well.
And well, I guess I'll just toss in now, especially given some of my experiences with the MPO, and seeing people who have been there for a long time, and how I think they're just so invaluable as resources. So I would say that whatever we do, and that we don't force people out and away from this table, and maybe make the table bigger. But to the extent that people want to stay involved in regional transportation, we need to find something else for them to do that contributes to us and to regional transportation if we're going to ask them to not continue being a part of our TAC. Because they have a lot of knowledge, and if they wanted to stay a part of it, I very much would like for them to remain a part of it.
This is Skylar, and I've turned my video off because at this time of day I'm blinded by the setting sun, and I look a little foolish with a hat on. But Chris, I'd be really saddened to hear that you're thinking about departing, because I think you've been a tremendous asset to RTAC, and really will be a loss for us. And I also want to endorse what David said about, if it's not us, then who is it? And I represent the Boston Society of Architects, and I started out being an alternate because there was a actual member of the BSA, which I am not, who was selected to be the rep to RTAC. Well, he found out that RTAC wasn't what he thought it was, and I just continued because it is what I thought it was. And I've communicated with to the BSA numerous times that, hey, you know, I'm representing the BSA here and I'm not a member, and what do you want to do about that? Do you want to appoint somebody else? And I've never gotten a response. So I've been a member of our TAC for a long time. And, you know, I sort of fall into the category you're talking about people who are just around because they're around. Nevertheless, I think I've managed to make some contributions to RTAC over the years, and hope to do so in the future.
And I also didn't want to make
your time, Chris.
Yeah, and I didn't want to make, and I appreciate everybody's comments. I also don't want to cast any aspersions on people who have been around for a long time, because yeah, you do bring a lot of wisdom and knowledge, or we bring a lot of wisdom and knowledge, and and that's certainly important. But yeah, it's like there's other people out there too, maybe, who could contribute.
Well, I know we're kind of over our time here, so does anybody else have any final? We'll continue this discussion, but I just wanted to see if there's any last comments, questions. All right, I don't see any. So I don't know, Len, you kind of already you combined your chair's report with a comment earlier, correct?
Yep, that's probably why we're running a little late. Sorry, I tried to shorten
No,
things up.
I think it's just been, we've had a lot to talk about. So,
yeah.
Well, I think there were some minutes that we could vote on.
Yes.
To approve.
November 13th.
November 13th. So,
Mr. Montgomery, you want to move to approve those?
Or I just, for the record, point out it's, I believe, November of 2019.
Correct.
Yep. So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented from the November 2019 meeting of the Advisory Council.
I'll
make a second.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't second. Sorry about that.
Did I hear somebody else second?
Sorry, this is Andy. I'll make a second.
All right. I forget how does it go after that?
You can ask for any discussion.
Right. Well, seeing none. Are there?
I think we have to do a roll call.
We should. I agree that we should probably do a roll call vote.
Right.
Scott, I can call the roll if you'd like.
Okay.
All right. Andy Reeker.
Yes.
Okay. David Montgomery.
Yes.
Brenny Osmond.
Yes.
Chris Porter.
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Okay. Fred Mosley.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Owen McDonald.
Yes.
Skylar Larrabee.
Yes.
And John Seward.
Aye.
Okay. If I missed anyone, I believe I got everyone, but feel free to unmute yourself and.
Pretty sure I was there, so yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Len. I only forgot the chair. I'm an idiot. Anyone else? Okay, that passes with one abstention.
Okay. So I think that's pretty much everything we had on our agenda for today. So sorry we ran over a little bit. Thanks for those of you who are still here. And unless there's anything else from anybody, I think we could move to adjourn.
Happy Valentine's, folks, guys.
Move to adjourn.
Everybody. Take care. Good meeting. Thanks, Scott. I gotta run. Unless
Thank
you have
you.
something you really want to say, I'm gonna run.
I think technically
Yeah.
during this time, we have to actually vote to adjourn.
Yes, thank you. We do need a second to adjourn, but then we can say, you know, without objection, we adjourn.
Second.
All right, we have a second. Mr. John Seward. Or from David, was that you?
That was me, but
All right, thank you, David. Just want to get it right for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Franny. Bye-bye.
thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.